Hello, everyone. It's Lori White, president of the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, back with you today with episode number 117 of Chamber TV. And today we have a very, very special guest. I'm really excited to be able to share a discussion today with Colin Ryan, who is a best-selling author. And he has just come out with an amazing book, which I have read, called Working Backwards, Insights, Stories, and Secrets from Inside Amazon. Came out in February. It's already being talked about on all the business channels. I heard Colin on Bloomberg Radio a couple of weeks ago, which is what gave me the idea of inviting him onto Chamber TV. So good afternoon, Colin. Welcome. I understand you're calling in today from Seattle.
Yes, thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, so great book. I have to tell you that I've enjoyed every moment of it, and appropriately, I downloaded it on Audible, which is an Amazon property. So I've been listening to it and really thinking about some of the principles and the lessons that you and your co-author so aptly described. So let's start at the very beginning, if you don't mind. And tell us a little bit about the title. How did you come up with this idea of working backwards, and what does that mean in Amazonian speak?
Well, working backwards, it's the title of our book, but it's also the name of a very specific process at Amazon, and it's the process Amazon uses to take an idea and vet it and determine whether to turn that idea into a product or feature, or start a new business. So every idea at Amazon goes through this process, however small. It could be a feature that's going to go on the phone app, or it could be should Amazon move into a brand new business or geography or open a new category. And at its heart, the working backwards process, it's really all about starting from the customer experience and then working backwards from that. And that's different from how a lot of organizations make decisions to move forward with an initiative. A lot of companies or organizations use what's called a skills forward approach. They look at what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and how can we move into an adjacent market. And really what often is not mentioned is the word customer. So Amazon really just changed the whole process and pivoted to make sure that the customer is front and center from the very beginning of an idea. And so the primary tool Amazon uses in the working backwards process, it's a written document that is a press release and an FAQ, frequently asked questions document. Mm-hmm. So the first thing someone does if someone has an idea or a team, what they do is they write a one-page press release. Now, press release has to upfront clearly describe what is the customer problem you're trying to solve, explain to the customer the solution, and it has to, and then tell the customer why it's beneficial for them to use the feature or buy the service. And after you read that one-page press release, if you're not excited to go out and use that product or buy the service, you go back and you start over again. So it's an iterative process.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of sort of reverse engineering, if you will, starting from the end. What do you want to accomplish? Can you get yourself excited? Is there enough momentum to get the project going? Yeah. So you've given us a lot of great overview information to set the context for our conversation. But before we actually get into the meat of it, let's just spend a couple of minutes, Colin, talking about you and how you got yourself into a position where you were able to write this book. So you were Jeff Bezos, what they would call, or what you had called, technical advisor for a number of years. So tell us all about that.
Yeah, so I started at Amazon in March of 1998, and the corporate area was about 100 people. You could fit the software team in one room, so we could get together to talk about what we're building next. It was cozy, but we could jam everyone in a conference room, and we were only selling books and just in the U.S. And so Amazon had just finished $148 million in revenue the prior year. And so got to see how Amazon and the company grew from a books only, $150 million company to spend 12 years at Amazon, to the multi-billion-dollar company, now hundreds of billions of dollars, that pretty much sells everything in a wide variety of businesses. So I started out in the software group, but then from 2003 to 2005, I spent 2 years. I was lucky to have spent 2 years as Jeff Bezos' technical advisor, or chief of staff, it's typically called at other companies. And internally, they call it Jeff's shadow, because what I did is, I spent 10 hours a day with Jeff for 2 years, and participating in all of the business meetings. They weren't just technical focused meetings, but anything that Jeff was involved with, I would be there with him. The first part of the job was to help make him a more efficient and a better CEO. And then the second part of the job, is the way that Jeff put it to me, is we, by the end of this tenure, we wanted to be able to model each other's thinking, because I was going to go someplace else in the company and work relatively independently and autonomously. So it was a very pivotal time during Amazon, where there were lots of products and processes that were developed. And then after those 2 years in the technical advisor, I went to work at IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Amazon, as its chief operating officer.
So you talk about being Jeff's shadow, and in your book, Working Backwards, you talk about a pretty rigorous schedule that both you and Jeff adhered to on a day-to-day basis, where you would work together beginning from 10 in the morning to 7, actually, as Jeff's shadow in meetings, and making a strong contribution and really vetting all of the ideas and the thoughts of the Amazonian team. So give us a feeling for what that was like to be in a meeting with Jeff Bezos.
It's a bit like drinking from a fire hose, to be honest, just because the amount of context switching that Jeff does. We would be in one meeting focused on deep technical architecture issues, and then meeting with another team about where to open the next fulfillment center, and then talking about a press release that's going to come out, and everything in between, or how the electronics business is going to evolve over the next 12 months. So sitting side by side with Jeff, we would meet with all of these teams. Some of them were large meetings, but actually most of them were just a handful of members in a relatively small conference room. And one of the things that Jeff, obviously a brilliant person, he loves what he does, and the laugh that everyone talks about, it's true. You will hear it many times a day. But when he would come up with an insight, one of the things he doesn't get, I don't think, as much credit for, is being a great teacher. And when he has an insight, he will walk the room back for how he got to that insight. So for me, it was, I learned something. I literally learned something new every day working with Jeff, and so did the other people around him, and became just a better thinker about how to build organizations from scratch to large organizations.
Yeah, so the genius of critical thinking is what I believe you're explaining, and part of his persona, if you will, was the idea that you couldn't convince him of anything, right, until he was able to prove it to himself that it was actually true.
Yeah, when he would look at it with a critical eye, and just challenge the fundamental underlying assumptions. And one just simple example is, this was early on when a bookseller wrote in to Jeff, and Amazon was very new at the time, and said, "Hey, you have these things called customer reviews on your site, and you're letting customers say bad things about certain products. I don't know if you know this, but you're in the business of selling books. You make money when you sell books." And Jeff thought about that for a second, and really just evaluated, well, is that statement true? And he said, no, it's not. We're in the business of helping customers make informed purchase decisions. And if we can, in the minority of instances, if we can educate a customer, well, this book is maybe not for them, or if they've already bought the book, don't click on it and buy it again. That was a problem that our heavy customers had. You build up trust in the long run. So that's just one example of the critical thinking, or looking at things from a different perspective than most people would.
Mm-hmm. talk a little bit about the typical meeting at Amazon, and you describe a scenario that is distinctly different in terms of how the participants interact with the meeting, and specifically the banishment, if you will, of PowerPoint. Now, that sounds like a great idea. How does that work?
Well, a lot of meetings at other organizations usually start with someone getting up in front of the room, or in Zoom, and talking through a series of slides. And sometimes they'll get through the presentation. Sometimes they'll be interrupted or peppered with questions that may or may not be answered later on in the presentation. And we had a 4-hour management meeting with Jeff Bezos and his direct reports. It was every Tuesday from 10 to 2. And 1 or 2, actually 2 to 3 teams would come in each week to present issues. And a lot of times it was a decision-making forum. And the meetings were not going well. And we realized they were well-intentioned, smart teams. And, obviously Jeff Bezos and his direct reports wanted to get to make the right decisions, but we realized we were using the wrong tool. And so in June of 2004, Jeff just said, okay, enough. Starting next Tuesday, anyone who comes in and presents to the S team, that management team, is going to come in with a written memo instead of PowerPoint, and we're going to see how it goes. So a couple of things about that decision. One, it was a reversible decision. If it didn't work, we would have just gone back to using slides like every other company did at the time. And 2, there were some bumps along the road. It took us a while to figure out that we did, in fact, make the right move. And Jeff later called it one of the best moves Amazon has ever made. And the reason why it's worked so well for Amazon for this decision-making forum is just in terms of pixel density. It's about 7 to 9 times the pixel density of a slide of a narrative versus a slide. People read faster than they talk. And it's harder to write in narratives, but it does require the writer or the writing team, because these narratives are often written by more than one person, to write a cohesive 6-page memo. But it forces the writing team to have clarity of thought before it gets in front of the audience. And the last thing it does is it removes bias. And this was an important thing. You can have with a presentation, you can have a charismatic speaker who can convince a group to do a so-so idea or something that, this isn't really great for the company, and you make the wrong decision. Another type of bias is just the opposite. You could have a great idea, but just an awful presenter, and you're thinking, when is this PowerPoint going to end? I can't wait to get out of the room. And the company or organization may not do something that they should have done. But at the end of the day, the customers really care. Did the company make the right decision to build value, product or service that makes my life better as a customer? And so the way Amazon meetings like this run, it's quite different, and it's a little bizarre to the uninitiated if you were just to pop into an Amazon room. So what happens is, the usual chit chat or virtual chit chat, what's going on now, and then everyone says, okay, well, let's begin, and the document is circulated either physically or virtually, and it goes silent for 20 minutes. And during that 20 minutes, the audience, they're reading the document and they're entering questions or comments in, through something collaborative like Google Docs, or if you're in a room, then you can write them down. And after those 20 minutes, then it's open up and you can have a Q&A on about that topic. And if you were to look from another lens on what happens during that 20 minutes, there's just a massive amount of information that's being transferred from the people who wrote that document to the audience or the other people in the room. And so the next 40 minutes is just a high quality discussion. And, so all in, you get about 10 times as much information in an hour of a narrative meeting versus a PowerPoint or slide meeting. And so more often than not, you're going to make a higher quality decision. So that's why Amazon made the transition and how those meetings work. And it takes a little while to get used to be quite honest. The 20 minutes of eerie silence it's a little uncomfortable at first, but once you get used to it, you're just focused in on the document.
We are talking to Colin Ryan, and he is the co-author of Working Backwards, Inside Stories and Secrets from Inside Amazon. It's a brand new book just published in February. We are live on Facebook, we are live on Twitter, and we are live on YouTube. So if you're listening and you have any questions that you'd like to pose to Colin, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will curate them and get your questions answered. So the purpose of today's talk here on Chamber TV is to really get some granular lessons. And our audience, as we know, small business professionals mostly, and we are talking to Colin and asking him to share the genius, if you will, of Amazon and some of the things that he learned as Jeff's shadow, as Colin phrases it, about how certain little management tweaks throughout the day, throughout the process of being innovative, of taking chances, taking risks, being customer focused, being customer centric, how to take those exact comments or concepts and drive them through a process that really works, that's kind of unconventional, and much like Amazon can lead to unconventional results. So that's what we're talking about here right now. And Colin is giving us some examples of how you yourself can think about how you run your own business and manage your own meetings, and work with your staff to surface ideas, and how to segment the good ideas from those that really don't have potential, and ruling out certain inherent biases. So that's what we've talked about at this point. So Colin, what advice can you give to our listeners as they continue to really focus in on what you're saying today? How can you help them begin to think a little bit differently and replicate some of the secrets of Amazon?
Yeah. So one thing, there's a saying that we used at Amazon, and it's still used today. It's that good intentions don't work, mechanisms do. And the reason why is, if there's a mistake or something happens that you don't really understand what happened, or you can't just say, well, try harder or do better next time, because you're not actually asking for any change. People are already, in general, trying as hard as they can. They're working as fast as they can. So instead, at Amazon, we asked, well, what process or mechanism can we put in place so we can make the right decision when faced with a similar set of circumstances? And then the other thing is that Jeff and the management team put a whole lot of effort when Amazon was relatively small, certainly very small compared to what it is today, for how you can encode some of this decision making and logic and processes throughout the company, so that people at the company make consistent decisions when Jeff is not in the room. And really for smaller, and this was when Amazon was a relatively small organization. And so what I would encourage, small organizations to think about, Amazon has 14 leadership principles. It's probably high for a small organization, but the leadership principles, what they are that's what everyone falls back on in the company or organization to make a tough decision when you as the leader of that organization aren't in the room. So you need to define them, and you need to have processes in place that reinforce them. And the second part is, if you're a growing organization, when you want to have a deliberate hiring process so that the next person you bring on board is going to reinforce that culture. And if you don't have that deliberate hiring process, to ask yourself, will this person reinforce what our company culture is? What's going to happen is your company culture is going to change, and it will change to something that you probably don't want it to be, because it's outside of your control. If you go from an organization of 3 people to 10 people, and you're not deliberate about those, the 7 people that you bring on board, most of your company then is going to be following a different set of guidelines. And that's how you get to the point when people ask, it's just not like it used to be a year ago. Why we changed, and why is that? It's usually because when we've seen it in organizations, it's because of either lack of a deliberate hiring process for people to reinforce the principles, or that the leadership principles aren't really, they're posters on the wall, and they're not deeply stitched into the web of what the company does on a daily basis.
Some of the ideas that you put forth in your book, which I see is featured nicely over your right shoulder. One of the more interesting aspects that I think that people could embrace immediately and put to work is this notion of measuring input, being very focused on the input metrics, and then sort of worrying about the output metrics after the fact, because the output metrics are symptomatic of the input, which you can influence. So tell us a little bit about what that means and how people might adopt that strategy.
Yeah, so the output metrics are things like revenue, how many new customers did we get? What's the free cash flow for the business for a quarter? Share price is another. If you're a public company, is another one. And those are important, but you can't control those directly. And Amazon, we realized that early on, and so instead of focusing on those, what we did at Amazon is we identified what are the set of actions that if we do these things right, they will yield the desired result in our output metrics. And it sounds simple. It's hard. It's harder than it sounds, and it's an iterative effort, and it's a learning experience and journey that takes a while to do. But once you identify those set of activities, you need to measure them. And a good example is with the e-commerce business. Amazon has a concept called the flywheel, which really that concept came from Jim Collins. He's an author who wrote a book, Good to Great, a fantastic book. I'd encourage you to read it if you haven't already. But Jim Collins actually came to Amazon in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, and was talking about the flywheel concept. And at Amazon, we took that to heart and identified, well, what are the things that really drive the e-commerce growth? And it really boiled down to lowering our cost structure so we could lower our prices. Lowering prices is easy. Being able to afford how to lower prices is quite challenging. Selection was another one. How do you keep adding more and more products that are available for sale in the catalog? And then convenience, which is largely being able to find items easily on the website, but it's reducing the delivery time from click to deliver. And the concept of the flywheel is if you work on those things, they're durable. They'll pay dividends now, but they'll also pay dividends 10 years from now. Because if you work on something that lowers the company cost structure and you can afford to lower prices, that's great. Because 10 years from now, customers aren't going to say, this Amazon e-commerce thing is all well and good, but I wish the prices were a little higher, or I wish it took longer for them to get goods. So Amazon focuses the majority of the time on input metrics, and usually those input metrics are a direct measurement of the customer experience. And so we would measure things like how many new items did we add to the catalog last week, last month? What is the click to deliver time for each of the items that we sent out, or how many deliveries did we miss? Missed promises did we do? And we would focus on those. And if you do those things right, then the revenue will come. And so it's not that Amazon doesn't, we've heard Amazon doesn't care about profit, so they can afford to do some of this. I'm here to tell you, it was really hard to get resources at Amazon, especially early on. And we had to be incredibly sharp and operationally efficient. And so you just have to have the conviction, and this is what Amazon has, is that in the long run, the customer needs are completely aligned with the shareholder needs. So if you serve your customers right, it will work out with your shareholders.
Paint a picture, if you will, of how Jeff Bezos would go about leading a discussion on input metrics.
Yeah, we would have what was called a weekly business review, and it was about a 50-page deck. So this is another, and they were graphs.
You use a deck for that.
We do, yeah. So PowerPoint was banned for these decision type meetings, where but we do use slides for all hands, but for reviewing metrics, where there's not a narrative. That is, they're more graphs and charts versus slides. But yeah, you need to use the right tool for the job. So there is a 50-page deck, which is a series of dashboards, and we would go through. If you were to look at what that deck is, the vast majority of it measures the customer experience. How many contacts per order did we get? What were customers complaining about? What were the defects that we experienced? Was everything that we found? We would audit. Inventory record accuracy is very important, and that is we have all these items in all the fulfillment centers. Are they on the right aisle, bin, and shelf that we think they are? So there was a continuous audit process going on there. And the reason why is because if you lose track of where your inventory is, or you're sloppy about that, you can't promise customers that click here and order this product and it will be on your, you'll get this in 3 hours and a day, and 3 hours and 32 minutes. You have to be really operationally crisp to do that. So we would also sometimes not hit our revenue goals for the or like we wouldn't be on track. What you wouldn't see is Jeff or the leaders pounding the fist on the table and saying, we've got to do all we can to go hit our quarterly revenue number. Analysts are expecting this, or the stock price is going to take a hit. But where you would see the leaders getting a kerfuffle would be if we, why didn't we add more items to the catalog this week or this month? Or why are more customers complaining about late deliveries? Or is this warehouse in particular, fulfillment center, not keeping track of inventory the way it should? Because those are controllable inputs. You can actually change those. The only way you can really change how we're going to hit the revenue number for the month is what companies do is they'll do a fire sale promotion. You stop what you're working on, and then you work on these promotions. And all you're really doing is you're pulling demand from a future period into the current period. You're not creating new customer demand. You're not actually growing the business. So when the next month or the next quarter starts, the first day, you're just in the same hole you were before. So this is another great point, is that this long-term focus on customer input metrics doesn't mean it will take you longer to get to your goal. Long-term thinking often gets you to your goal faster because you're not doing these zigzags or quarterly fire drill or monthly fire drill exercises in order to hit an arbitrary, or not an arbitrary target, but a target that was set by someone else that may not reflect how the business is trending. So, Jeff would really focus on the controllable input metrics that are, customer facing.
How would Jeff dig beyond the surface to make sure that the controllable metrics were the right controllable metrics?
You have to be able to see when, if you saw an input metric going up and to the right, and then it didn't have the impact on, revenue or whatever it happened to be, then you realize you have the wrong metric, or maybe I need to tweak the metric. So a great example is with selection. We first said, okay, we're just going to define selection as adding new products to the catalog. And this is another thing. If you ask a group of people to go do something and you say, here's the measurement, they will typically go do whatever it takes to drive that number in the right direction, up if it's revenue, or, selection, or down if it's defects per, parts per million. But so what happened is those category teams just started working with distributors and got a lot of stuff into our warehouse that necessarily didn't really sell too well. But we can get another 10,000 electronics items in our warehouse. So our warehouses were filling up, but sales, we didn't see the resulting increase in sales. So that metric was going up, and we realized after a couple of tweaks that the important thing is, so sometimes you weight it by sales weighted demand, but we realized that wasn't the right way either. And we weighted the items by category page views. So what were customers looking at? So you get bonus points if customers were looking at a product on the website, and it was available for delivery via Amazon Prime. So it was in the right place in our fulfillment centers. And we wanted, something like, we start, I'll just pick a number, 95% of page views have a product in stock that's available to ship via Amazon Prime. That drove the right behavior for the category teams. It also improved the customer experience. And then, each quarter or year, we would nudge that up. So how do we get 95% to 97%? It gets harder as you go along, but as you get good at doing that, this is another thing. It's a durable customer need that now you're at 97 and 98 and 99. And then eventually Prime shipping is not 2 days, it's 1 day. And then it becomes same day. And so this is where that flywheel comes into impact. This is a very specific example of a metric that it was wrong. It was not quite right at first, and you had to tweak it along the way.
Thank you for sharing that. What you're saying is that, don't stop at the obvious, really dig through and be really clear about what the real drivers of your business are. And another secret that you shared, or thought or approach that you shared, was the relentlessness of the asking why, the relentlessness of saying, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? So if you peel back the repeated whys, ultimately you're left with the solution to a problem that you may not have known that you had. So can you give us an example of how that works as well?
Yeah, we had a process called the correction of errors report at Amazon. And if you're going to push the envelope and you say we want to be an inventive company, you actually have to, one, expect failure, and two, have processes for when those failures happen. How can you learn and get better for them? And the correction of errors was one thing. So, software teams, sometimes they built software that took down the website, or part of the website went down, or it would start serving pages that would give errors. It's very rare that the whole website goes down anymore, but it did happen. But whenever something like that, a defect like that happened, the team or teams that were responsible were they had to write up what's called the correction of errors report. And this is something that we learned from Toyota. They're borrowed from Toyota, so this is not an Amazon idea, but if we call it the 5 whys in that correction of errors report. You ask, why did this happen? Well, it's because this service went down, and you keep peeling it back till you get to the root causes. And it's often not one thing that causes these errors, especially after you've been going through this process for a while. Mm-hmm. It's just 2 or 3 things happen in sequence that you didn't expect. And so, the solution, maybe we need to put in monitoring, or we need to automate something, or put in a check. An AWS service went down because an operator entered, they were typing something in and they entered the wrong number that just really took down the whole service. So in AWS, they said, before anyone manually changes the configuration of these network routers, it's 2 people are going to look at it. And then there were automated checks to say, are you sure you want to take down 20% of the routers right now, and and escalate that? So those are things that were the 5 whys, and you fix them. Amazon has a part of their leadership principles is, when we see defects, we do not let them travel downstream. And that means that if you see something, you need to fix it, because the error is it's going to happen again, and it's likely happening in places that you don't see. And the cost of those errors are usually a lot higher than you anticipate, in terms of loss of customer trust or loss of word of mouth. Yeah, I ordered from Amazon and it took 2 weeks to get it. They never got back to me, so I'm not really going to order from this company again. And I'll tell my friends that. So it's not just the cost of that one delivery usually.
We are live on Facebook, we are live on Twitter, and we are live on YouTube, and we are taking your questions to Colin Breyer, who is chatting with us here on Chamber TV about what it takes to be Amazonian and what it took for Amazon in the early days to become the behemoth that it is today. And we're talking about management lessons that anyone can implement with a little bit of creativity and a little bit of persistence. So we do have a question from John, and John wants to know, he's acknowledging that a great process can yield great results, definitely. But he says sometimes things don't work out, even when you have a great process. Things don't work out as expected. Can you give an example of one idea you were skeptical of that turned out to be a huge hit? And how about one that you thought would be great, but it wasn't so great? It was a flop.
Yeah, sure. And I can go back to digital. So when Amazon had realized this was back, I would say in 2004 timeframe, we knew that the writing was on the wall that books, music, and video, that business was, some or all of it was going to go digital. We didn't know when. We also, at that time, 77% of Amazon's business revenue and all of its profits came from the physical shipments of books, DVDs, and CDs. So, and so and there were things like Napster was going on. We didn't really know how that was going to shake out. Apple had just launched the iPod and iTunes on Windows. So, this was the first time Apple had ever went into and built a Windows application. They were before just 10% of the computing market, but now you could get digital music anywhere. So Apple was all in on digital music. And we didn't want to become someone like a Kodak where, we made cameras and sold film, but something was going digital. And we also didn't know, should we do a copy, a copycat service and build the equivalent of iTunes and an iPod really quickly. And what we did is we sat back and really started from the customer experience and figured out, where can we add unique value to customers in digital media? And it turned out that it wasn't trying to leapfrog Apple or get out to market faster. In the music space, we thought that the first area was books. And going through this working backwards process, we realized that we needed to be a device manufacturer, because our e-commerce business, where all the value that we created and the secret sauce of that business was the fulfillment centers, where we got lots of products and had an unlimited catalog, and we could efficiently ship physical products, even throw 2 or more in a box cheaply and deliver them reliably to customers. In the digital space, that was no longer true. While it was a non-trivial exercise to catalog every book or every song or every movie, companies could do that. So you couldn't differentiate yourself by having the biggest catalog of digital music, because it's not a competitive advantage. So we realized that the areas where we could differentiate were on the device side. And at this time, Amazon, we just wrote code and launched a website, and we shipped products, that other people made. We were not a device maker. And so it turns out that, okay, well, if we were going to get into digital books, we had to become a device maker. The board really wasn't, they were skeptical of that idea. Why are you now into building devices? You don't know anything about what it takes to build a hardware device. But we realized that we had to get that skill and had to get it pretty quickly, or we were effectively going to become a Kodak of the physical e-commerce business. And so that was one where, people were skeptical, and there was one meeting where, and it was expensive. It took us longer. We made a lot of mistakes because we hadn't really built devices before. There's one meeting in particular I was in with Jeff and this, some of the other senior managers, and the Kindle project was over budget. And someone turned to Jeff and said, "How much money do you plan on spending on Kindle? This is taking longer and it's way more expensive than we thought." And Jeff turned to the CFO at the time, Tom Skutak, and looked and smiled and said, "Well, how much do we have?" Jeff knew exactly how much money we had, by the way, but he was sending a message that we're all in on digital books. We have to figure this out, or someone else is going to cannibalize our business. There's a lot of skepticism over for a fairly long period of time, and in the Kindle, when it launched, turned out to validate that was right. If I were to talk about a failure, predicting how consumers are going to buy and use your products, it's inherently risky. A big failure would be the Fire Phone. It's not like we thought the Fire Phone was going to be a flop, because it was one of the larger projects at Amazon at that time. And it turns out for a few reasons, when it launched, it did not hit our expectations. And that was, it was discontinued relatively quickly after that. And it went through the same processes, the same working backwards process. So these things don't guarantee success. And the flip side is, if you aren't making failures like this, you're probably not moving fast enough. And when the Fire Phone did fail, the head of the Fire Phone didn't get fired from Amazon. And the company spokesperson talking about that failure was Jeff. If you go back and look at those Fire Phone interviews, Jeff even said, "I hope we're working on even bigger mistakes right now, because our company's bigger, so we need to be taking more risk and pushing the envelope." And failure, it takes only a few successes like AWS and Kindle to pay for lots of failures, like Fire Phone.
Yeah. So the idea behind Fire Phone and why it potentially failed was it didn't align with your brand of really driving a competitive pricing point. And probably at the same time, the Apple iPhone became even more prevalent in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough, risky proposition, and going into it, we knew there was a chance that it could fail, but it was worthy of experiment, to try.
Yeah, and I like the analogy too that in baseball, if you hit a grand slam, you only can put up 4 runs max. But with the analogy that you were just giving of thinking big and failing big, even if you fail big, you could also really succeed big, and you can put up more points on the board other than 4, right?
Yeah, those outside returns that AWS paid for a lot of failures at Amazon.
So were people intimidated by Jeff at a meeting? So somebody comes in and they let's just talk about the phone for an example. It could be some folks really being skeptical, but you could see that Jeff was really jazzed about it. What was the atmosphere like when the senior management team is wrestling with decisions and you see Jeff kind of wanting to go in one direction, and how do you titrate that conversation? What was the atmosphere like?
Well, yeah, I mean, it varies by individual. Some people may interact with Jeff once or twice a year. So when that would happen, I would, try to help them out beforehand, or talk to the team beforehand. And I wanted to make sure it was both a very productive meeting for Jeff and for the team. I wouldn't usually tell them what to say. And if they asked me, what is Jeff going to say? I would say, I don't know, but here are some core principles to fall back on, because you never really can predict what Jeff is going to say. And usually when he does say something, you think, oh yeah, I guess I should have thought of that. But then he, as I mentioned earlier, he walks you back and explains his reasoning. So Amazon does have high standards. Jeff holds people to very high standards, including himself, by the way. And when those standards aren't met, as leaders, it's up to you to point out that here's where we did not meet our standards, and what can we do in the future to hit our high standards. Because if you don't point those out, what you're effectively doing is you're lowering the standard of behavior. You may have thought, well, oh yeah, I thought I was gonna we're gonna have a discussion about this. I knew I made a mistake, but no one brought it up. Inherently, and everyone knows this too, even though it's not verbally mentioned, is that, its standards are a little lower than I thought. So as a leader, you need to make sure that you do keep the standards high, and you need to point those out in a respectful way. I would say that we got better at doing that. We weren't perfect. There were some meetings and where we have a lot of junior or first-time managers, and you need to train people, how to respectfully disagree and commit with things, or respectfully point out where standards aren't met.
You left Amazon in 2010, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you miss it? Do you miss the energy and the excitement of being part of one of the most disruptive companies in history?
Yeah, I do. We say that you can you can't really take the Amazon out of me, even though I left Amazon. I think that there's this way of thinking and acting. It's now part of who I am and how I act at other companies and operate. I will say that it's given me a different perspective on, if you spend your whole career at Amazon, you think, well, I guess everyone else works this way. And leaving Amazon, I got to, in the career beforehand and afterwards, figure out where those differences are and, what is unusual. And so that's one of the reasons we wrote this book. And I think it would have been hard to write that book if, both Bill Carr, my co-author, and I were still at Amazon and had spent, 20-year careers at Amazon and didn't get that perspective in other types of organizations on how do companies, and organizations operate. So I'm a big Amazon fan. And it's a great company. I have good friends there, and but I'm also doing other things. I'm always learning and new things, and so I like that too.
So are you one of Amazon Prime's biggest customers?
I am a very big customer of Amazon Prime. Yeah, we've got a steady stream of packages coming in, and the digital Prime Video. But yes, I'm a pretty big Amazon Prime fan. I lived overseas for a couple of years, and there was no Amazon Prime in Singapore. I lived, and that was I got to see the stark difference of not being a Prime customer versus being a Prime customer.
It's super bad withdrawal, right?
Yeah.
So no discussion of Amazon would be complete without talking about the critics of Amazon, and you address some of this in your book as well, about critical of the business processes and the disruption on Main Street per se. What would Jeff Bezos, or what has Jeff Bezos said about that, and what lessons does that present for disruptive thinking?
Yeah, so I've been gone for a while, so if I don't have the detail on specific events that are happening, but currently today. But I will say a couple of things. A company is only as strong as the people who work for them. Ultimately that is the gating factor in what will make a company successful or not. And Amazon, we had and continue to put a lot of time into, not just the corporate employees, but the people in fulfillment centers and customer service. Amazon was one of the first companies to move to $15 an hour, wages. There's a career choice, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into training and upskilling people. Amazon has platforms, self-serve platforms that are great for small businesses. The third-party marketplace business allows people to go and do things that you couldn't do with a small business. You can put your products in an Amazon fulfillment center and have them be shipped same day or next day without incurring that cost to customers across the country. AWS is another example where there are lots of companies that you can start up and try out an idea very cheaply, because AWS has turned what used to be a large fixed cost in terms of buying your own computer hardware, or renting or leasing computers in a data center, and in building or buying software like a relational database like in Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server. Those are all large fixed costs for companies, or even for small organizations. So you couldn't try and experiment and iterate pretty quickly. These are all variable costs now, where you can do those with relatively small, modest startup capital. So Amazon has done a lot of things that I think allow small businesses and employees. Amazon has 1.3 million employees to improve the livelihood. That having been said, Amazon also operates in a much different place in society today than it did 5-10 years ago. And I think that some of these practices can and should be part of the public dialogue and scrutiny, just because of the impact, the magnitude of the impact it has on society.
Yeah, just to give an example, there's stories in the news today or over the past couple of weeks about the potential of an Amazon warehouse being built in Rhode Island, and as such, it would be the largest building in all of Rhode Island as a distribution center. So, we're talking about starting, a company on a very, very micro level, and again, creating the behemoth and the disruptive force that it is today. But nevertheless, there are so many lessons that you yourself have been part of and learned and curated and talk about in your book that small business professionals can put to work right away. And we've talked about a few of them so far that people can, turn on a dime and say, yeah, I can do that. I can work on that. Another one might be, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, tell us about your experience and Jeff's experience working in customer service for the day. And from what I understand, that was a requirement of all executives at Amazon to actually work the phones.
Yeah. So when I started out at Amazon, wasn't only a requirement. We would get an email, hey, there are a lot of orders we got today. We don't have enough, excuse me, capacity in the warehouse. Can you come down after work and go pack books at the end of the day? So, we'd either take the bus down or, carpool down to the fulfillment center, which is about 2 miles south of the office in Seattle, and pick and pack books. And we, sometimes also, hey, we have a lot of customer contacts. Can you log on and answer a few customer emails? So we did that. And what we realized is that there's a lot of knowledge that we got about the customer experience from doing those types of activities. And this is one of those things, as you grow from a small organization to a large one, how can you turn this into a repeatable process? Now, you don't always want to have it be a fire drill to say, okay, everyone go to the warehouse, on an unexpected high volume day. So you need to figure out how to do that. But we had these two programs called, it was customer connection, and there was an equivalent one for the fulfillment centers, where you would actually go work in the warehouses for fulfillment centers for a couple of days. And then another one was where you'd be a customer service agent. And when I was working with Jeff as his technical advisor, this was every 2 years you had to do it. It was Jeff's time. You get this email that says, hey, your customer connection time 2 years is up. You need to go, schedule a customer service connection appointment. So we drove down to Tacoma. I think it was like half day prep, but then 2.5 days. And what we would do is we started off excuse me, by working with and just observing the customer service agents, listening in on calls and watching them answer emails, and they would train us. And then eventually we would write and answer emails and use those tools, and then also take customer calls. And one of the calls we were listening in on, a customer called up, and Jeff and I were standing over the shoulder of the customer service agent, and we could hear it was on speakerphone. The customer said, I ordered some lawn furniture, and one of the chairs came and it was damaged. And the customer service agent said, well, can you tell me the order number and look that up? And so the customer was looking it up, and because for some reason it didn't pop up on the screen. But so she put the mute button on the CS agent and turned to Jeff and said, I bet you it's this product. And on another screen pulled up the Amazon site, and there's a lawn and furniture product. And when the customer came back and mentioned the item, it was that exact same product. And Jeff's eyes, and he mouthed like, how did you know that? And after the call, we talked about that. And the customer service agent said, well, we've been getting a lot of calls lately for this one in particular, that, the boxes that we're using to ship these, that the vendor sent to ship these products, they changed their their packaging, and we're getting more and more damages for this product. And, so in the end, we would ship out, a replacement to the customer. But Jeff then, we have been studying Toyota total quality manufacturing. And there's a concept called the and-on cord, where in a Toyota plant, if there's, the cars move along and they're being assembled, it starts off very small, and you add parts to the car. And if you notice a defect, there's really a cord you can pull, an and-on cord that stops the whole line. And a quality team goes and inspects the defect and figures and you can't move forward until the defect is identified and corrected. And so Jeff wanted to have the equivalent of a virtual and-on cord. And right there and then he said, we should get our own and-on cord, and we called it the big red button. So now when customer service agents can detect problems coming up, they can actually press that big red button. And what it does on the website is it removes the buy button on the page. So customers cannot buy the product. They can still see it. And the category manager, they want to sell those products. They get notified right away. Hey, customer service agent has pulled your product from the site because of the following reasons. You need to go identify this, and report on what happened and fix the issue before you can start selling this product again. Because we didn't want to be in the business of shipping out defective products to customers. So that would not have happened had we not, gone and be CS agents for 2 days, or, it would have taken a long, long time. It was unusual for a CEO of $1 billion company to sit there answering customer emails and taking customer phone calls. But there are sometimes wonderful customer insights that can come out of it.
Did the customers know they were talking to Jeff?
No, it was funny. They didn't, and so this was a while ago. But when they heard his laugh, he didn't say this is Jeff Bezos, but the customers didn't know at first.
That's a great story. So we've been sharing thoughts and ideas that business professionals can employ in their own workplaces to better understand what it's like to be a customer of the business. And we've talked about a whole bunch of things, working backwards and figuring out, how the product, acting as though the innovation or the product that you are proposing to go forward with, how it would actually appear in the marketplace. And then you answer all the questions, the FAQs, before you even begin. So you talked about the PR statement, the PR release, and then you also talked about the FAQs and acting as though they actually were products that already were in the marketplace. So this is the salient point of your book of working backwards. And before I let you go, I just want to give you the opportunity to just, crystallize that one more time for us. We talked about it at the beginning, but I want to leave on this note of the notion of working backwards and how people can plant it in their own minds and figure out how to make it work for them.
Yeah, so good ideas, or ideas that may seem good at first, they're actually quite common. And I think that lots of organizations, one of the challenges is this idea worth doing, or is it big enough worth doing? And there are expensive ways to answer that question, which is by building something really fast, going and launching it and evaluating whether it sticks with customers. Or this working backwards process is a relatively lightweight way to do it. You write the press release, and the frequently asked questions are, what are the tough questions and answers that you're going to need to solve and organize around in order to bring this product to market? And the external facing FAQs are where you explain to the customer, why should I change my behavior? How is this product better than what's on the market? So you write that down, and it's pretty easy to, because everyone has, you read a press release and pretty quickly, yeah, I would buy this or I wouldn't. That's a much cheaper way to vet and evaluate ideas. And sometimes if you have an idea, but you're not really sure what is the best way to accomplish it, one thing that we've done at Amazon, I've actually implemented at other companies, is write 2 or 3 competing press releases. It's one page. It doesn't take that long. But then the great idea, which one of these implementations actually very quickly pop out. And the other thing that this does is it really gains alignment of the people moving forward, because now you've got a written document of exactly what you're building. And if you have an idea and you verbalize that, but you don't take the time to really go down to that next level of detail on what is the customer problem we're trying to solve, what are we building, and the team goes off, they're all going to be building a slightly different version of what you think they're building. And that, again, wastes precious bottleneck resources. So this is not only a great way to pick the best idea and solution, but it's also a great way to conserve your bottleneck resources. And the last thing I would add is a lot of these processes, people say, well, Amazon can do it because now they're approaching $400 billion in revenue and unlimited, funds, and all these smart people working for them. These processes were started and really developed in small groups, and they work, and they're of fractal quality. But all of these processes, actually all of them were started when Amazon was relatively pretty small, especially compared to what it is today. And they work for a 5-person group or a 50,000 person, company. And they're pretty easy to get started, and, it may take you a while to perfect writing narratives or get your hiring process and leadership principles encoded. But don't think that it's not useful for small organizations, because we've seen it has pretty good and noticeable positive changes for small organizations too.
I think the net of what you have been saying is that the necessity of challenging your own self to be really clear and intentional about what you're doing, and not going in with a lot of fuzzy thinking and unanswered questions.
Yeah, fuzzy thinking means that everyone is thinking something slightly different, and that's where you get different parts of the organization having tension and causing essentially wasted effort to your ultimate goal.
Well, Colin, we've reached the top of the hour, and I know we need to let you go, and I will do so. But I did want to ask one last question. And you've been on your book tour since February, and a few weeks have gone by. I know you've done a lot of these discussions, and we really thank you for taking the time to be with us today. But I have to ask you, what is the most common question you've been asked about Jeff Bezos?
The most common question, I think it is more just what is he actually like, and he loves what he does. He's got a passion for building customer organization. His curiosity and spirit of invention, they're infectious. So you spend any time around Jeff, you will, and then his long-term thinking. This is someone who's building a clock that just is going to last 10,000 years as a hobby. And also working on doing the heavy lifting to get goods from Earth into space. So you have to, and he takes that long-term thinking for Amazon too. But that long-term thinking doesn't necessarily mean it takes you longer to get to your goal. So just the spirit of invention, that long-term thinking and customer obsession, and then those high standards, the pride in the operational excellence. Those are things that really shine through that work. Working with Jeff. And he just loves what he does. He's not doing it for a legacy or because, he's trying to meet other people's expectations.
I think it's too late for that. I think he indeed has left a legacy. So he announced recently he is leaving the day-to-day leadership of the company and being in an executive chairman type role.
Yes. Yep. And Andy Jassy, who's started in May of '97, is taking over, and I know Andy. I know Andy well, and Amazon's in good hands with Andy too.
And the principles that we've talked about today still pretty much in place.
Oh yes, yeah, and they're. I think what Jeff really wanted to do was create these principles and processes, so he didn't have to be there when these decisions are made, and that's why I think and Andy is well steeped in these principles and processes too.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to throw you a softball now. Where can you buy your book?
Well, you can buy it at any local bookstore. You can buy it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or you can just go to our website, workingbackwards.com. And there's a list of places where you can buy it. If you're outside of the U.S., it's available too. A couple of different languages already, which is kind of cool to see. I'm a first-time author, so I'm new to this process. I'm learning a lot on how it works, but plenty of places to buy it. There's, I guess it's right behind me there too.
Don't forget, you can download it on Audible like I did.
Yes.
Okay. Well, good luck with the book tour, Colin. You've been very generous with your time, really enjoyed it. And I know that we got a lot out of this conversation, and looking forward to thinking about some of these ideas. I particularly love the idea of the input and output metrics and really tweaking those. I think that has a lot of real value to small businesses in particular. So have a great
time so
in Seattle. I hope the weather's nice.
Today it is, yes. Yeah, we're lucky about that today.
Okay, come back anytime.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.